The throne room was huge and made of crystal that glowed with soft blue light from the walls and ceiling in ways that seemed almost alive and breathing with energy that pulsed like a heartbeat through every surface around them, all standing there waiting for something important to happen. Soon enough, when they least expected it to come crashing down upon their heads, without warning at all whatsoever in any way, shape, or form, imaginable by anyone present here today or tomorrow or ever again, after this moment passes by like sand through an hourglass, measuring time itself as it flows endlessly forward into the unknown future ahead of us all together, as one united people under the stars above our heads, shining brightly in the darkness of space surrounding our worlds and homes, where we live out our lives day by day, trying to make sense of everything happening around us, constantly changing and evolving into something new and different from what came before. It all began so very long ago now. Queen Silvera sat on her black stone throne looking down at the visitors who had just arrived from Earth and other human worlds beyond the borders of her empire, which stretched across many star systems, filled with her people who had perfected themselves over thousands of years through careful breeding and genetic enhancement to become the best versions of themselves possible in every way that mattered to them as a species dedicated to excellence and superiority over all other forms of life in the galaxy around them. Her skin was gray and green like deep ocean plants, and her eyes were large and multifaceted like cut gemstones that reflected light in strange patterns across her angular face, which humans would probably find ugly or frightening. But among her own kind, she was considered beautiful beyond measure and worthy of ruling over billions of subjects who obeyed her every command without question or hesitation at any time, day or night. Beside her throne lay Zarthus, her dragon companion, who was not like the dragons from human fairy tales, but something far more alien and terrifying, with armored plates covering his serpentine body and crackling energy wings instead of feathered or leathery ones like the stories told, and his three eyes watched everyone in the room with predatory focus that made even the bravest warriors nervous when he looked their way. The human delegation walked forward with careful, measured steps, and at their front was Ryan Hayes, who looked completely ordinary by human standards with brown hair and average height and a face that would blend into any crowd without anyone noticing him at all, but his eyes showed something different from fear or greed. Like most species showed when meeting the Queen for the first time ever in their entire lives, Ryan spoke, and his words were translated into the musical language of the Velkari's people through advanced technology that made communication possible between different species who had never met before this historic moment in galactic history. He said that humanity thanked the Queen for allowing them to meet her and speak with her about important matters concerning both their peoples and their futures together in this vast universe filled with countless wonders and dangers lurking in every shadow and corner of space. Silvera made a dismissive clicking sound with her mandibles and asked why she should not simply destroy these humans who had entered her territory without proper permission and resisted her mental probes and demanded to talk instead of surrendering like all the other species had done before them when faced with the overwhelming might and power of the Velkari's empire. Zarthus rumbled deep in his throat, and his energy wings flared with threatening brightness that filled the entire throne room with crackling electricity that made the air smell like storms and lightning strikes. Ryan smiled, which was a strange expression that did not translate well, but his body language stayed relaxed and calm as he explained that they were curious about the Velkaris, and suspected that the Queen was curious about humans too, because in 200 years of exploring the galaxy, they had never encountered anyone quite like her people before this moment. Silvera called it flattery, but Ryan said it was just observation, and went on to explain that the Velkari's empire spanned 47 star systems and had mastered biotechnology to amazing degrees that made human scientists jealous. But despite all this advancement, they had not changed their fundamental biology in over 3,000 years, which suggested they had reached an evolutionary plateau and stopped growing. The queen became agitated at this suggestion, and her crest flared up as she demanded to know if he dared suggest imperfection in the Velkhari's form. Ryan calmly replied that he suggested stagnation instead, and explained that humans were beautifully imperfect and short-lived and fragile and irrational and waged wars over strange things and fell in love with inappropriate partners and created art that served no survival purpose whatsoever. But because of all that chaos, they were still evolving and adapting and surprising themselves every single day. Silvara asked what his point was, and her tone had shifted from contemptuous to intrigued. Ryan glanced at his companions, then back at the queen, and formally requested a cultural exchange where humans would learn about Velkhari's bonding rituals with dragons and genetic cultivation methods and philosophy of perfection, and in return, they would show the Velkharis their pairing methods and their chaotic, unpredictable, utterly illogical approach to relationships and reproduction and survival. The throne room fell completely silent, and several advisors began chittering in alarm at this unprecedented proposal. The queen asked if he would really show them human methods, even knowing the Velkharis might use that knowledge against humanity. Ryan smiled wider and said that human pairing methods had been their greatest strength and greatest weakness for millions of years, and if the Velkharis could figure out how to weaponize human stubbornness and romantic poetry, and their tendency to bond with literally anything that showed them affection, including her dragon there. Given half a chance, then, they were welcome to try. Zarthus made a sound that might have been laughter. Silvara rose from her throne and towered over the human and studied him with her compound eyes seeing past his plain exterior to the sharp intelligence within. She accepted his proposal, but warned that if his methods proved worthless, or if this was some elaborate deception, she would personally feed him to Zarthus. Piece by piece, Ryan bowed and said he understood, but warned her that humans were very difficult to digest, because they were full of caffeine and spite. Despite herself, the queen made a clicking sound that might have been amusement. 3 cycles passed since the humans took residence in the southern spire of the imperial palace, and to the court they were honored guests, but to military advisors they were an intelligence opportunity, and to Silvara herself they had become an increasingly frustrating puzzle that she could not solve, no matter how hard she tried. She stood in her private war room, looking at holographic displays showing the current state of her empire, and the news was troubling, because the Kresh Dominion had been making incursions into disputed territories which normally would warrant swift, brutal response with dragon-bonded warriors descending from the skies. But the humans had asked her to wait, and against her better judgment she had agreed. Ryan entered the chamber with Amy Foster trailing behind, carrying a portable data unit. Silvara demanded to know why she should not simply annihilate the Kresh forward positions, Ryan said, because she was fighting the wrong war, and the Kresh were not her real enemy but just a symptom of a larger problem. Silvara flared her crest and said she had been waging warfare since before human ancestors discovered fire, and he should not presume to lecture her on strategy. Amy interjected gently but firmly, saying they were not lecturing, but offering perspective, and explained that they had spent 3 cycles analyzing all Velkhari's conflicts over the past 2 centuries and found a pattern the queen might have missed. The hologram shifted, showing a complex web of connections between various conflicts. Ryan continued explaining that the Kresh and other species were all acting more aggressively toward the Velkharis recently, but not because of any coordinated alliance, but because they were responding to the same stimulus, which was that the Empire had stopped expanding. Silvara replied automatically that they had achieved optimal territorial distribution. Amy corrected her, saying they had stopped growing, and in nature, when you stop growing, you become prey, and other species sensed weakness, even if they could not articulate why. Silvara felt anger rising and stated that the Velkharis were not weak. Ryan agreed, but said they had optimized themselves into predictability, and their enemies knew exactly how they would respond to any provocation, because they had bred themselves to make the perfect tactical decision every time, and there was no chaos in their warfare and no inspired madness. Silvara asked if this was a flaw. Ryan grinned and told her about a human military commander named Patricia Grant, who defended a colony world against an invasion force 3 times her size, and by every logical calculation she should have surrendered or been annihilated within 48 hours. The Queen asked what she did. Amy said she threw a party and broadcast invitations to the enemy fleet with catered food and live music and everything, and the enemy commander was so confused he held position for 6 hours trying to figure out if it was a trick, and in those 6 hours her engineers fortified defenses and called for reinforcements. Silvara said it was illogical. Ryan agreed completely but said it worked because it was unexpected, and the enemy commander was bred for perfect tactical responses, just like the Velkaris, but perfect. Tactics assume rational opponents, and humans were magnificently irrational. Silvara paced around the holographic display, while Zarthus raised his head from the corner to watch his bonded companion. The Queen asked if Ryan suggested she should be unpredictable. Amy said carefully that they suggested she consider alternatives to the optimal solution because the Kresh were probing her borders expecting overwhelming force at the point of contact because that was what she always did. Silvara said it was the correct response. Ryan asked if it really was, and pulled up another display asking what if. Instead of crushing their scouts, she invited them to negotiate or offered them a joint scientific expedition to that disputed nebula they were interested in or did something that did not fit their predictive models. Silvara clicked her mandibles rapidly in deep thought and asked if he proposed diplomacy with the Kresh. Ryan said they proposed chaos, and the kind of beautiful, messy human chaos that made enemies second-guess everything they thought they knew about her. The Queen turned to face her dragon, and through their bond she felt his curiosity, because the dragon at least found the humans fascinating. Silvara decided to let them draft their chaotic response to the Kresh, but warned that if this failed and even one Velkaris life was lost due to their advice, she would feed them to Zarthus. Ryan finished her sentence saying yes. They remembered and joked that Amy was vegetarian and might disagree with dragon digestion. Amy elbowed her superior officer, but Silvara noticed the casual camaraderie between them, which was so different from the formal hierarchies of her own people. As the humans departed to draft their proposal, Silvara remained in the war room staring at the displays, wondering if in pursuing perfection for 3,000 years, her people had also bred out the very qualities that made survival possible in a chaotic universe. The quantum gardens were considered one of the wonders of the Empire, with genetically perfected plants blooming in mathematically precise patterns and colors selected for optimal aesthetic harmony, and it was here that Silvara agreed to witness the human pairing demonstration, though she still was not sure what that meant. Ryan and Amy stood before a small crowd of Velkaris observers, including the Queen and several high counselors, while Zarthus lounged nearby with his energy wings dim in contentment. Ryan began by explaining that among humans they called this courtship, and it was one of the most chaotic, unpredictable, and entirely illogical processes in their species. History, Silvara commanded him to get on with it, though her crest quivered with barely suppressed curiosity. Amy smiled and activated a holographic display showing 2 young humans meeting at some kind of social gathering. She explained this was a recording from a human colony world showing a standard dating scenario, and they should notice that the male named Jake was attempting to impress the female named Lisa by demonstrating his physical prowess. The hologram showed Jake juggling flaming torches, but he immediately dropped one and set fire to a decorative plant. The Velkaris observers chittered in confusion, asking if this was mating display because he had injured himself. Ryan said cheerfully that human courtship rarely went according to plan, and they stumbled and made fools of themselves and tried too hard, and the perfection was in the imperfection. Silvara watched as Lisa laughed not at Jake, but with delighted surprise, and helped him extinguish the fire, and they began talking. And there was something in their body language that the queen found strangely compelling. Another counselor observed that they were not genetically matched, and their phenotype suggested suboptimal offspring potential. Amy agreed probably, but explained that humans did not pair based on genetic optimization, but based on chemistry, which was ironic because it had nothing to do with actual chemistry. Ryan pulled up statistics showing that humans paired based on emotional compatibility and shared interests and physical attraction, which varied wildly between individuals, and humor compatibility, and about 1,000 other factors that had nothing to do with producing genetically superior offspring. Silvera stated it was inefficient. Ryan agreed incredibly so, but explained it gave them diversity in genetics and culture and behavior, and when you pair for perfection, you get homogeneity, but when they paired for love or lust or loneliness or any messy reason, they got variation, and variation meant resilience. Amy switched to another recording, showing an elderly human couple sitting together watching a sunset. She said softly that Marcus and Helen were married 72 years, and genetically they were a terrible match with family histories of disease, but their offspring had all the predicted health issues. A counselor demanded to know why celebrate this pairing. Amy said simply because they were happy, and because Marcus was a musician, and Helen loved music, and they made each other laugh, and when Marcus had his first heart attack, Helen sat by his bed for 3 days straight. And when Helen could not paint anymore, Marcus built her a custom easel, and they chose each other every single day for 72 years. Silvera felt something strange in her chest and said this was sentiment with no tactical value. Ryan challenged her, asking how many of her subjects would die for their partners. Silvera replied immediately that all of them would because it was logical to protect one's genetic complement. Amy asked if they would die for each other joyfully, and would they consider a long life without their partner to be hollow? And would they look at their partner after decades together and still feel their heart rate increase? Silvera had no answer because Velkaris pairs were efficient, productive partnerships, but joy and longing were not factors. In the equation, Ryan stepped closer and said seriously that the truth was there was no method, and every human relationship was unique chaos, and some were disasters, and some were transcendent, and most were somewhere in between. And yes, it was inefficient and messy, and often ended in heartbreak. Silvera demanded to know why persist with such madness. Amy and Ryan exchanged a look, and Amy answered because the alternative was a life without wonder or surprise, or the possibility that someone might choose you not because a computer said you were compatible, but because something in them recognized something in you. Silvera turned to Zarthus, who had been bred specifically for her with their neural patterns, matched with quantum precision, and their bond was perfect and efficient and utterly predictable. And yet sometimes, in quiet moments, she felt a strange emptiness, as though perfection itself was a kind of loneliness. The Queen commanded them to show her more. Ryan and Amy smiled, and for the rest of the afternoon they filled the gardens with stories of human love that was foolish and brave and heartbreaking and transcendent. The Kresh fleet arrived at the disputed nebula exactly when intelligence predicted, with 17 warships bristling with weapons, and the Queen had her own fleet waiting in formation with dragon riders mounted and ready for traditional opening assault. But this time, there would be no assault. Silvera commanded from the bridge of her flagship to open a channel, and Ryan stood beside her looking remarkably calm. The Kresh commander appeared on the view screen as a hulking creature of crystalline armor and bioluminescent aggression patterns. He rumbled that the Velkaris, a queen, should withdraw from the nebula or be destroyed, and this was her only warning. Every instinct and genetic imperative screamed at Silvera to unleash Zarthus and the Dragon Fleet, and the Kresh commander was ready for exactly that response. Instead, she said she had a proposal. The silence was profound, and the Kresh commander flickered in confusion. He finally managed to ask about a proposal, saying this was a territorial dispute, not a negotiation. Silvara asked why it could not be both, and explained the nebula contained rare stellar phenomena, and both their scientists wanted to study it, and they could fight over it and waste ships and lives, and whoever won got to study a war-torn debris field, or they could conduct a joint expedition. Amy, monitoring from the science station, gave a subtle thumbs up. The Kresh commander ground his crystalline plates together, saying this was unprecedented, because they had been enemies for 4 centuries. Silvara replied that they had been fighting over resources they could share, and both species optimized for territorial dominance rather than collaborative advantage, and neither had ever considered a third option. The commander demanded to know what option that was. Silvara said chaos and felt strange exhilaration at the word. The commander stared at her. Then his bioluminescence shifted to deep thought rather than aggression. He said he needed to consult with his matriarchs because they did not have protocols for this scenario. Silvara admitted neither did they, which was precisely the point. The channel closed and the bridge erupted in confused chittering, and several advisors looked like they might molt from sheer stress. The chief military strategist protested that this violated every engagement protocol Silvara wheeled on him, demanding to know what they would accomplish with another glorious battle, and asked how much territory they had actually gained in the past century. He hesitated, saying growth had been minimal, but they maintained their holdings against all challengers. Silvara said exactly, and they had achieved tactical perfection at the cost of strategic stagnation, winning every battle and gaining nothing. Before anyone could respond, alarms blared and tactical displays lit up with new contacts. The sensor officer reported Zoral collective vessels dropping between their fleet and the Kresh. Amy cursed in 3 languages and explained they must have been monitoring the standoff, waiting to see if they would weaken each other. The Kresh commander reappeared, accusing treachery and saying they lured his people into an ambush. Silvara snapped that they did no such thing, and the Zoral were everyone enemy. He growled, telling her to prove it by standing with them against the Zoral, or he would assume coordinated attack. Every calculation told Silvara that allying with the Kresh was illogical, but she looked at Ryan, who gave her the smallest nod. She turned to her weapons officer and ordered tactical coordination with Kresh fleet in combined defensive formation to protect the nebula. The bridge went silent. Her strategist whispered they could not trust the Kresh, who could turn on them the moment the Zoral were defeated. Silvara agreed they could, or they could honor a debt, or be so surprised by cooperation that they reconsidered 4 centuries of hostility, and she did not know what would happen. And for the first time in her very long life, she found that uncertainty exciting. Zarthus roared his approval. Silvara commanded all ships to form up with Kresh vessels and dragon riders to coordinate with their assault craft, saying today they fought not as enemies temporarily allied, but as scientists defending shared work. What followed was the strangest battle in Velkaris history, with sleek warships moving with blocky Kresh dreadnoughts and dragons breathing bioelectric fire, while Kresh weapons cracked enemy shields. When the Zoral fleet finally broke and fled, it was to the side of Velkaris and Kresh ships protecting each other. The Kresh commander appeared again with bioluminescence patterns shifted to respectful confusion. He said slowly that they should discuss terms of this joint expedition. Silvara felt her mandibles click in what might have been a smile and agreed they should meet in the nebula itself on neutral ground, which was a human custom. The commander rumbled that these humans seemed full of interesting customs. Silvara replied he had no idea, while glancing at Ryan and Amy, who tried not to look too pleased with themselves. 6 cycles after the incident, Silvara stood in the quantum gardens alone with Ryan, who had requested a private audience. She stated that he was leaving, and it was not a question. Ryan nodded, saying their mission was to establish first contact and determine if the Velkaris Empire represented a threat, and they had completed that assessment. Silvara asked his conclusion. He said honestly that they were the most terrifying civilization humans ever encountered because they could optimize themselves into whatever they needed to be, but also the most promising potential ally because they were willing to learn. Silvara said the joint expedition with the Kresh proceeded ahead of schedule, and her military advisors were adjusting to the new paradigm. Ryan asked how the Queen was adjusting. Silvara was quiet, watching the perfect flowers sway, and said she found herself questioning everything after 3,000 years of genetic refinement, all designed to eliminate the very uncertainty he taught her to embrace. Ryan said gently, that was called growth, and it was uncomfortable but necessary. Silvara turned to face him, asking if the pairing demonstration was truly about mating rituals or something else entirely. Ryan smiled, saying she was as sharp as intelligence reports suggested, and yes, it was about choice, and showing her that the most important decisions could not be optimized by algorithms and required something they bred out, which was the willingness to be wrong. She asked, what if she was wrong about the Kresh and they betrayed the alliance? Ryan said then she would deal with it and learn something, and that was how humans survived for millions of years despite being outclassed by every predator. Silvara looked at her genetically perfected hands and said before he came she believed she was the pinnacle of evolution, but now wondered if she was just a sophisticated dead end. Ryan replied, she was neither but a civilization at a crossroads able to continue optimizing toward perfection or embrace chaotic beauty of growth, and there was no right answer, only the choice itself. Zarthus entered the gardens and lowered his head to her level. Through their bond, she felt his thoughts and curiosity and excitement and desire for the new and unknown. She said, surprised that Zarthus wanted to see human space and witness chaos firsthand. Ryan asked if dragons could travel independently. Silvara said slowly, no, not without their bonded partner. The implications hung between them. Ryan said quietly to come with them, not as an empress studying enemies, but as a person exploring new perspective, and bring Zarthus to see how humans lived and worked and loved and failed and tried again. She asked if he would trust her aboard human ships with access to their worlds. Ryan said they would trust her to make her own choice about what she wanted her civilization to become. Silvara felt the weight of 3,000 years of tradition pressing down. She thought of Marcus and Helen and Patricia Grant and Ryan and Amy, and thought of her empire vast and powerful and perfect and utterly stagnant. She said she would need 3 cycles to arrange succession, protocols, and her sister could serve as regent. Ryan smiled, saying that was the most human decision she ever made. Silvara replied perhaps, or perhaps it was the most Velkaris decision to seek optimization through gathering new data. Ryan observed she was rationalizing a leap of faith. She asked if there was a difference. Ryan said in humans not really, because they were excellent at post hoc rationalization. 3 cycles later, Silvara stood in the docking bay of the human vessel with her sister beside her. Her sister said the Empire would be here when she returned, but if she was gone too long, she was claiming the throne. Silvara protested she was 473 years old and hardly midlife. Her sister countered that for a queen, it was exactly midlife, and this was either the worst decision in their civilization history or the best, and either way, it would be very interesting. The sisters touched crests in deep affection. Then Silvara walked up the ramp with Zarthus at her side. Ryan and Amy met her at the airlock, welcoming her aboard and warning that human ships were less elegant than Velkaris vessels. Silvara replied she was ready for that perspective shift. As the ship departed, she took one last look at her empire from space, with perfectly ordered cities and optimized zones, and dragon riders in precise formations, beautiful and perfect and predictable. Amy appeared with 2 cups of coffee, asking if she was ready to see what messy, chaotic, imperfect civilization looked like from inside. Silvara accepted the cup, even though her biology was not optimized for caffeine. She said she was ready to find out what they had been missing, as the ship jumped to faster than light travel. carrying a queen away from everything she ever knew. Silvara realized her people had asked the wrong question for millennia. They asked how to achieve perfection when they should have asked what makes life worth living. She did not know the answer yet, but for the first time in her long, perfect, optimized existence, she was excited to find out. And somewhere in the quantum gardens, the perfect flowers swayed in controlled breeze, unaware their queen had chosen chaos over certainty and growth over perfection, and the unknown over the optimal. It was by any measure a very human decision, and perhaps that was exactly the point.